Do you struggle to find balance in your life? Are you constantly concentrating on one thing too much and another not enough? This is At the Root of Knowledge, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about finding balance.
Hello and welcome to At the Root of Knowledge, where we discuss timeless topics. Through conversation, we try to identify underlying principles and assumptions beneath many of mankind's ideas and beliefs. All this so we can find the truth and share what we learn with you. Please keep in mind that we are not experts, and just like you, we're here to learn. Today, we will be talking about finding balance in life. How are you doing, Phil?
I'm doing well. I'm making it through life with reasonable success, I guess.
Reasonable.
I'm at least getting closer to my goals, I'll say. How about yourself, Daniel? How are you doing today?
I am fantastic, my man. I'm doing great. I've got plenty to live for. More to work for.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we can all relate to that. But anyway, to the task at hand. What is finding balance in life? Like, why? I guess first and foremost, why should you try to find balance in life?
I think you should try and find balance in life so that you can feel fulfilled.
I think another thing that you need balance for is, yes, feeling fulfilled and not overwhelmed with one thing, but also I would say so you can focus on the things that you should be focusing on.
What matter most?
I think some people might see balance as like, oh, I can't balance, for instance, my work and my home life. And that's fine and all, but I think maybe some people are too focused on work and they're not focused enough at home, and there's something to be said for that. But I think a lot of people too just struggle to put time aside for what needs to be done. For instance, you can separate it into work and home, but there's other stuff that needs to be done too, other than your family life and your work life. Like, there's a social life involved and a spiritual life.
Right. Or maybe, you think it's important for you to spend time to volunteer for things. Right. I think you make a good point, and I would add to that, ordering priorities. You have to have a balance in order to put your priorities in order. Because it takes balance to apply yourself proportionately to the things you contribute to in a way that's balanced, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. At least in the way I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to rationalize it as to, like, if one thing needs to be of the highest priority, then you balancing your life to where you're putting more effort into that or more time into that.
Right.
Which is fine for a time, I guess. It's
Right.
If something is of the utmost importance.
Right. Well, not to try and shift the stuff too much, but I think balance is actually extremely important, because I can tell you that's one of the things that's been most difficult for me to come to terms with is the feeling of, wow, I spent all this time working this week, but I didn't do any of this stuff that I really wanted to accomplish, like whether it's a project I'm working on, whether it's making time to read or whatever, and I feel horrible if I feel like I'm not applying myself the way I should to things that are important and will actually matter years down the road. Or like, it's not very often anymore, but occasionally there'll be like a day where I don't do anything, which sometimes I think is necessary. Like if you don't, if you, if you're not, if you only get like 4 hours of sleep every night because you're up till midnight working because you've overstretched yourself because you've got a million different projects going on that you're trying to keep up with. Yeah, sure. Like it's good to maybe take a day and just sleep and not do anything. But not
Right. I mean, even God rested on the seventh day, so there's something to be said for that.
But right, or like, yeah, I feel horrible if I feel like there were hours and hours of my day I wanted to spend doing things that I thought were more important, and I ended up messing around or just going and, basically being a bum or talking to somebody for 4 hours straight in a conversation that I felt like was not that productive. And yeah, I feel really, I know myself, I feel really bad if I feel like I wasted a day doing something other than, well, if I feel like it was useful and it was important that I did that, then I feel okay. But if I feel like I wasted the time where I should have been spending it doing something important, that gets me closer to having my taxes filed or closer to having my tools ordered the way I want them to, or closer to having the projects I've got lined up, finished, or whatever. I feel horrible if I feel like I wasted my time or spent it on something that didn't contribute to what I thought was important. Maybe that's a bit long-winded, but yeah.
Yeah, I can see your reasoning there, though. Kind of how I'm thinking about it in my own head is splitting things off, like time. I guess the way I'm thinking about it is how Stephen Covey puts it in his book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, when he talks about P and PC, which is production and production capability.
Mm-hmm.
Like you put time aside to sleep, and you put time aside for, what do you want to call it, recreation. You put time aside for work. And so the thing I would say that's reflected in, Stephen Covey talks about keeping P and PC in balance. So, and the one story that I really like that he uses is the story of the goose that lays the golden egg.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you the goose is your production capability and the golden egg is your production. That's what you want. You're working towards that. And so the owner of the goose gets a golden egg, and then he goes and kills the goose because he's trying to get more golden eggs. And the moral of that story being that you have to take care of the goose enough to where it will keep producing golden eggs. So if you want to liken that to yourself, maybe your PC, your production capability, is setting time aside to get enough sleep and setting enough time aside for some form of recreation, so that you are able to go to work on time. You're able to be productive at work in a way that's going to benefit you next week when you get your paycheck, but it's also going to benefit you next month or next year when you have a performance review, or there's a new position that if you got, would be a promotion and possibly a raise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is important. It's just like, I mean, just like anything, like making the podcast, like what's the golden egg? Recording a podcast. What's the goose? Setting up stuff to develop new stories, a new way of to make the podcast better and higher quality and be able to keep doing it.
Right.
And even in there has
having
to be a balance.
conversations where we're figuring out new areas of new topics and new discussions that we could have.
How we structure the podcast.
How we structure it, exactly.
How we schedule the time to
right,
record.
And the one thing that popped into my head as soon as you said schedule the time is originally we were planning on having the podcast published every week. And
right.
Our production capability just would not reflect that. So we had to dial it back. And I think that was a good idea that we did, because for the most part, I would say when we were attempting to publish every week, our content quality was far, far worse than it is now. And you can say that some of that is due to inexperience, and I'll give you that, but there is still an element of just the amount of time it takes to think up topics and putting thought into the topic of how to best explain it or how to best look at the topic. For instance, with our influence episode,
right?
I think I struggled for 2 weeks straight on that topic. And I struggled to break through the surface of what we were trying to figure out. And I'm glad that your dad, Mr. Sheck, was able to come on, because he provided a lot of valuable insight for me.
Yeah, it's not easy coming up with these topics and coming up with things that are both interesting, not only to think about, but you're able to actually talk about and provide interesting content talking about
something
it.
That has a significant amount of depth to it.
Right. Yeah, it is very difficult. And I said this when we first started this podcast, and I stick to it. I think we really picked up I think we picked up a very tall task trying to talk about the things that we are trying to talk about. And to do the stuff justice, it takes a lot. And it's definitely been a learning experience for me, at least. And it has not been easy a lot of the times. Even it's so basic. A lot of times it's so foundational that some of it's just difficult to analyze. Analyzing is taking something and breaking it into smaller pieces. But once you got something into such a tiny piece, eventually you got to take stuff on faith. There's no more breaking it apart, and it's really difficult to try and comprehend some of these most basic principles, because it kind of takes some sort of in my opinion, some sort of intuitive acceptance.
I think so.
Which is difficult to explain when you get so small, when you know what I mean, break something apart so far.
That is true. I know where you're coming from there. And that's not unique to us discussing things. You can see that reflected in a lot of areas, such as philosophy. There's many questions in philosophy that are still I'll say unanswered, and it's kind of widely accepted, like we don't have a good explanation. We can't necessarily explain it or comprehend it. We just have to go on what is the most rational argument.
Right.
I mean, although going back to what you said about when we started the podcast, I agreed that it was a very large undertaking to take on the responsibility of running a podcast or publishing a podcast. But we did we broke it down into very small.
Bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, and while they may have been hard to swallow, still it's been something that I've gotten used to. And I am happy that we've done this. I mean, the one thing that we kind of agreed upon was that we weren't doing it for the purpose of uh, gaining fame or to
make money
or to pat our own egos of oh, look at us, we discuss difficult things. It was more to in the hopes that we could learn something and maybe help someone else learn something too. And we said, even if, one or two people were going to listen to it, at least we help one or two people.
Right.
And that's worth it to me.
Yeah, and that was kind of the thing from the get-go was, let's challenge ourselves to try and think critically and communicate effectively. And we got a long way to go. But
we have come a long way too.
Yeah.
You can make both of those arguments, and they're very sound arguments both ways. That some of the listeners may not realize the amount of editing that used to go into an episode, as opposed to, this is getting a little off topic, sorry, but the amount of editing that used to go into an episode as opposed to the amount of editing that goes into now, based on misspeaking or just sort of blank spots in conversation,
embarrassment and whatnot.
Or using the term that I use is conversation filler, that you just say things like and that was a big thing for me. Like, I had to learn not to use that word a lot, and I did. I think it was the first or second episode we recorded. When I listened to it, I was so shocked at how much I used the word
Right.
as if it was commonplace to use, and it is fairly common. I know a lot of people who do still use it, but I notice it now in other people more because I've seen it in myself, and I've tried to pinpoint that as an area where I can.
Yeah, I think a lot of the. Go ahead.
Where I can really improve on just being able to speak without using words that don't necessarily belong in the dialogue of a conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot of conversation and being able to talk and not feel horrible is just getting over yourself. You feel like you have to sound smart and educated when you make a response. It's like, sure, that's important, but if you want to ever actually be able to free yourself up to have a conversation, maybe let go of that and don't worry so much about making yourself look intelligent. Maybe, kind of ease the pressure and not get caught up on having to make it perfect.
I agree with that. I mean, I used to get really worried about that a lot. Was one thing that I would do was, I still do this from time to time.
We're getting really off topic.
I still do this from time to time, is I'll take a minute to kind of compose myself, and that's more to just make sure what I'm saying is going to be applicable. But there is the flip side of that too, where I feel now that I'm less terrified of saying something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I do say something wrong, then there was some thought process that I had that led me to say something wrong. But if I do say it and someone corrects me, now I know that what I said was wrong and I can correct that. Which I would say it's a beneficial thing to just be able to say what you are thinking.
Right.
And not even necessarily what you're thinking, just say what comes to your mind.
Right.
almost as a way of this is just responding to someone, not necessarily thinking critically about it in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's important for people to be able to speak their mind. Yeah, but we're getting kind of shifted off topic. So yeah. So you believe, I'm assuming, balancing your life is a good thing? Just an inference from what we've talked about so far.
Yes.
Okay, I do too. Now what do you think a balanced life or balancing your life will do for you, or at least attempting to balance your life? How will it help you? How will it improve your
Well,
quality of life?
on the most basic level, it's going to help you improve your, if you are taking everything into consideration, every
Mhm.
bit of balancing your life, which I think we've kind of talked about the different areas of your life a little bit in previous episodes, especially about, you know, physical health, spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, social.
Mhm.
So just taking those 5 things, if you wanted to balance those 5 things, that's an undertaking right there. It's really hard to balance that. Now if you want to say that you're going to balance all of those in the area of time, so you're going to set time for each of those things.
Mhm.
I would say that, I mean, if you're working on your physical health, obviously that's going to lower your the chances that you're going to have any
Heart
kind of
problems or whatever.
disease like heart problems or blood pressure issues. And just in general, it's healthy for you to exercise.
Mhm.
And going along with that, you're spending time on your mental health and kind of a self-care in general that's helps you to think clearly and be able to take on reasonable amounts of stress,
Yeah, and keep
especially
a
if you have a
positive
very
attitude.
correct, especially if you have a very stressful job.
Right.
Um, as far as your emotional health goes, there's a lot of factors there that aren't always in your control. For example, if you have a relationship with someone and they decide they want to break off the relationship, that can be a difficult situation to get through. But still having your emotions, I hesitate to say the word in check.
That's what I was thinking.
Although I think the problem with saying have your emotions in check, that implies to me that you're kind of bottling it up,
Mhm.
and eventually that, at least in my experience, bottling emotions up doesn't help. So I think you just, speaking about time at least, you have to
Be able to
find a
communicate
way
with your emotions.
to communicate with someone, I would say. Yeah, I mean, you can. There are ways to get through emotion by yourself, such as writing.
Mhm.
I know some people do that. They try to write everything they're feeling out on paper, and then they can read it to themselves, and it feels relieving in a way to hear it. And just talking with yourself out loud, just saying the things that you're feeling, but especially talking with someone else about it, because you can see their reaction to it. If I am telling you that I'm angry about a person who has deceived me in some way, like, I'm going to see your reaction, and we'll say, for in this hypothetical situation, I was done some wrong, they deceived me, and maybe they uh, took some of my money or something like that. And so maybe I could see some bit of empathy in your, or hear some of it in your speech when you respond to me telling you this story.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a way that balancing your life can help in on the emotional side. And spiritual health, I think that's one that doesn't get as much credit as it should. There's a lot of benefits that go along with being healthy spiritually. I think one big thing is your aim in life. I think if you're not very in tune with yourself spiritually, and spiritually it means different things to different people. But obviously being Catholic, I would say that means being in tune with God and keeping a healthy relationship with God.
And aligning your life with the principles he laid out for us to follow.
Yes.
That's how I would see it.
But with that, I would say that it gives you a certain amount of clarity in what your goals should be, what your mission should be, what you should be working towards at this particular time, which there's still going to be more often than not some fog there on, should I really be doing this? What if I'm supposed to do something like, for instance, should I really be going to college? What if I'm just supposed to work I'm just supposed to get a job and work. I'm supposed to work as a tradesman.
Mm-hmm.
There's always those questions. But I would say that that's just something that's going to happen. At least in my experience, that's been something that's just a result of making a decision, is that you always wonder, well, what if?
Right.
Did I cover all five? Spiritual, emotional, physical, mental health is a big one. I think mental health is something that there's been more awareness for it, I'll say, as of late. We'll say the last 5 years. But before that, maybe it's just because I was younger and I didn't hear about it as much, but I felt like there wasn't a lot of people talking about your mental state. And because of that, some people in my life who didn't really pay attention to it, they kind of would experience this high and low phases they'd go through, where everything in their life would be going well and they'd be happy. And then when something would go bad in their life, then all of a sudden they're miserable. And okay, if something bad happens in your life, there's reason to be somewhat miserable. But at the same time, I think it's worse. It's harder to cope with bad things happening in your life if you're already in a bad mental state.
Right.
And what I mean by bad mental state is that you have things that have piled up. For instance, I'll go back to that relationship that I was talking about. If I don't find some way to cope with that, to cope with, say, losing that person in my life, by going back and looking at it and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? What is this is this person onto something? Why would they leave my life? Why would they not want me in their life anymore because of something I'm doing? And finding that thing, or a couple of things maybe, and having a conversation with someone, or doing significant research that points to, well, maybe I'm not doing things so great. Maybe I could be doing things better. But my point being that if you find some amount of closure for for that to where you're not bitter about it. And that just helps in general to differentiate between that bad thing that happened and another bad thing that's happening now. Because you can get into the mindset that this bad thing happened, and now this bad thing's happening as a result of that. And then you just blame the other person for it.
Right.
Whereas if you can reflect and say, okay, this bad thing happened to me, maybe I did something wrong.
Right.
And now another bad thing's happening. You know, for instance, this person left me and broke off our friendship, and then my girlfriend left me and said that we, broke up with me, and now all of a sudden I've lost my job too. Maybe I have a problem keeping relationships. Maybe I treat people poorly, or just looking at it from that perspective. And that can really help to cope with bad things that happen in the present.
Here's a question. How does balance affect your social life?
That's a very good question. And I think there's an aspect of personality that goes along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean the trait of being an extrovert or an introvert. Because more often than not, you see extroverts as people who are highly social, and then the stereotypical introvert is someone who doesn't socialize at all. And that's an unfair stereotype for both sides.
Can you be exactly in the middle? I mean, you're taking psychology.
I
That's
don't.
a question I have. Like,
Can
or are
you
you
be-
always going to be on more of one side than the other?
You are always going to be on one side more than the other, yes. But that does not mean that, because that's not to say that, like, you're an introvert or you're an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can be an introvert and have some of the traits of an extrovert, and you can be an extrovert and have some of the traits of an introvert.
Right.
The thing that varies is how many of those traits and how prevalent are they.
Right.
And
Like,
if
maybe
they're
you're
super prevalent, then okay, maybe you are that.
Like, I've met people that I would consider introverted, but they've got no issue going up and giving a speech in front of a large audience. They got no issue, like, acting in a play, or performing in a band. Like, I know plenty of people that consider themselves introverted, and I would consider introverted. And same with people that are extroverted that, which you would think would go against the stereotype.
Well, it does go against the stereotype, but that's because it's a stereotype.
Right.
It's
It's not applicable in every situation.
right. I mean,
So how do you balance your social life? I don't want to get off topic too much.
so there is a varying degree we've established that there's a varying degree in introverts and extroverts, and so there's going to be a little bit of a difference for, I'll say, everybody, a little bit of a difference on how you balance your social life and your other areas of your life, I'll say. One big thing for people is that you have outside relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing for having a social life, is to be well socialized enough to where you have, I'll say, at least one or two people outside of your family that you have a good enough relationship with. And some of this I'm taking from lectures done by Jordan Peterson. You want to have a good enough relationship with them to where you are friends. And by friends, I mean Jordan Peterson's definition of a good friend, where you can tell them something good and they'll help you celebrate, and you tell them something bad and they won't say, well, that's nothing compared to what I'm going through. Like, they'll empathize with you if something bad happens to you, and they'll celebrate with you if something good happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And they want what's best for you.
Right.
And I would say, if you're attempting to balance your social life, the first thing you have to think is, where is your social life right now? Is it non-existent? Is it to the point where you can't spend any alone time? Those are the extreme sides of it. But if you're saying that you want to balance your social life, then I would say that's going to look something like having the appropriate amount of alone time to where you can reflect on the things that are happening to you, the things that are going on in your life, and having the proper amount of social time to where you can have conversations with people. And the conversations don't always have to be super in-depth conversations about metaphysical topics, but there is a certain balance there where you have enough alone time to reflect on your actions and your behavior, reflect on how you're living your life, and to do the things that you need to do without distractions from other people, such as homework. And also then to have the proper amount of social time to where you can go and have fun with a group at a party or a get-together of some sort. But if you're going to balance your social life, you have to know where you're at now and where you're going to be, where you're going to want to be. For instance, I could say, I'm an extremely introverted person. I don't have any friends. I pretty much stay in my house, which may classify you as agoraphobic, but that's obviously an extreme. So that's where I am, and now I'm going to set a goal to say, well, I want to have 3 or 4 friends. I want to go and meet 3 or 4 people, and I want to have them be a good influence on me, and I'd like to be a good influence on them, and maybe we could help each other. And then look at, okay, so then let's try to spend a couple hours a day being social, a couple hours a day talking with other people. And not necessarily just talking, too. Like, a big part of conversation is listening to what other people have to say. So,
right.
When you attempt to balance your life, I'd say at least start with those 5 areas. There's other areas that I'm sure we'll get into in this episode, but those 5 areas I would say is a good start.
5 areas of your life to find balance.
Yes.
You think? Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think it's important to balance your mental health, your physical health, You can, you can forget about one area and you can let something else get too big. Like, it's easy to forget about your physical health because you're worrying about your social life so much that you're staying up and, talking to people until 3 a.m. And you don't get enough time to sleep and you feel like junk the next day because you...
And that affects your mental health, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what exactly are you balancing in those areas, though? Because I've broken it down into... like 4 general pieces of what you're actually balancing when you're finding balance. and could be wrong, and could be leaving something out, but time. You're balancing time. You're balancing your feelings and your emotions. You're balancing your thoughts and like what you're focusing your attention on. And you're also balancing your resources and your physical assets, your money.
Okay. We did talk about the feelings and emotional side of it. We've talked a bit about time as well as your thoughts and some of the people that you spend time with on the social aspect of it. But we haven't talked about the resources and the money part of it. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Yes. So I think when you're talking about balancing your life and balancing your resources and money and how that all fits into having a balanced life, you've got to have some sort of a priority list as far as like what's important to you. And I think a big thing, especially with money and resources too, is kind of having a clear, long view. Not only what's important for me to spend money on today, because that's important too, but also what do I want my money to do for me for the rest of my life? And kind of targeting your money at those things also.
Beginning with the end in mind.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's everything, like resources and money. I mean, time's a resource too, but I think we're more talking about physical resources. As far as having balance with your money, I think it's important to, distinguish what you want your money to do and kind of follow through with that. Like for me, at least, I want some money to just blow, some money to just not care about, some money that I can just be like, I'm going to not worry about this money, let it flow out of my hands. For me, I do that. I do it through a budget. That's kind of like my master plan. And even though I adjust my budget, some things are as hard as a rock. Some things are flexible. They can change. But I leave enough flexibility in my budget so that I have freedom to spend money the way I want to spend it, but also enough structure in my budget so that I can make a plan for the future and make sure that the money is there to support that plan, if that makes sense. So when it comes down to finding balance with money and balancing it into your life, what's important? Is giving money away important? Like, is having money just to spend to, take people out to eat or to give to, a church or maybe a family member or whatever? If that's important to you, budget for it. Budget to have that money. And then that way you've got it all written out and you don't feel bad when that money's gone and you're not shorting someplace else. I think as far as finding balance goes, what do? You balance the budget, right? Because that's exactly what you're doing with a budget, is balancing your money, balancing where it goes. I think that for me is one of the most important parts. You got to think ahead and think like, how much money am I going to need for all these different things? Come out, figure out for yourself what's important. Is having the fridge always stocked with beer more important? Then sure, write it out. But the budget kind of gives you a clear, you don't feel bad about spending your money because you know where it is and where it will be because you keep track of it. That's a huge thing I've found. It's just keeping track of your money. It gives you so much peace because you know what you're going to be able to do with your money. And if you're like, hey, I don't like where my money's moving, if you keep track of your money and do a budget, you can always be like, all right, I'll redirect this, and you can look, how much am I actually making? How much am I actually spending? For me, for money at least, the budget is an indispensable resource for balancing your money with your life. As far as resources go.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that you didn't mention is what happens when you don't do that.
Well, then,
like, you get into some pretty rough situations when...
Plus, it can be terrifying. Because you're like, I don't know if the money's going to be there or not.
Right, I mean...
Or maybe you're working...
have a $500 bill coming up and you've got about $20 in your bank account. It's like, oh, I don't have that money. Like, so what happens? It's like, well, you got to find a way to pay it, and if you can't pay it, then either your credit score gets hit, and that affects your future goals, or worse things, especially if it's on like a car, and
It gets repoed.
yeah, exactly, and that's no good either. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong if that falls out of balance. I mean, I'd argue there's a lot of things that can go wrong if anything falls out of balance. But I mean, money is a very, very important part of it. Part of balancing your life. I mean, if you can't balance your life or balance your budget, then on top of the physical effects that it has extremely bad mental effects on you.
Yeah, talk about anxiety.
Right, anxiety, just stress in general. Like I wish I could remember the statistic on the amount of marriages that end in divorce due to financial reasons. Dave Ramsey cites it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's something like 70%, I think.
Right, and how many of those marriage failures would have been avoided if they just had a clear understanding of, one, what the priority was for the money, and two, where the money was being designated to, by which would have been solved by a budget if they both were able to keep a budget together, which I'm not saying is easy or simple, especially when you get started, especially if you're the one making the money and the other spouse isn't making the money, and you're both making decisions. Like, I understand, like, there can be a lot of stress, but once you get into a system of actually writing a budget, at least there's clear, defined rules and priorities, as long as you can come to an agreement on things, where I would think, like, if you can write a budget and agree on things together when you're done, that should solve the issues, most of them, with money, I would think.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you mentioned there was not being easy, and especially not being easy when you're starting out. I think that's something that I forgot to mention for any area of balancing your life, is it's not going to be easy starting out, and more often than not, you're going to fail your first few attempts to try and balance your time.
Oh, time's horrible. It's the worst.
It is.
Try and balance.
It is, but that's because we're creatures of habit. And
I
so
guess,
when you're trying to
thoughts and feelings are also very difficult to balance. It's
Right.
really easy to get caught up on thinking about stuff over and over when it's even unhealthy to think about.
Oh yeah. And feelings are the same way. I mean, back to that scenario where you're in the place where you've had like a bad relationship or something like that. You can get caught up in the same thought process of blaming that person or blaming fate for making things turn out this way. So yeah, I would say it's really difficult the first few times you try to balance anything. And you will fail, but there's an old saying about when you start at something, before you can master something, you have to be a fool at it, or something like that. Something similar to that. And my point being that you probably are going to fail a couple times, maybe a lot of times, but that's what you learn from.
Right. I tried writing a budget for a long time. I haven't really consistently, vigilantly stuck to a budget until a year or two ago, something like that. But like ever since I was like 14, 15, I tried to have a budget, failed miserably, tried to have a budget, failed miserably, tried to have a budget, failed miserably. And I did this several times, and I might make it like 3 days, and then I'd just be like, oh, this is too hard, give up. Until I got this app, Every Dollar. Now, they were not sponsored by Every Dollar or anything like that, but this app made it so easy, and I was finally just like, I've got to do this. Like, my future self depends on me changing. And I just continually kept on top of it. And it was difficult at first, but after like the first 2 months, and this is like my 4th or 5th attempt to keep a budget, ever since then, every dollar that I make and every dollar that I spend is accounted for and planned for ahead of time. And it feels great. It feels absolutely great. I know where the money's going to be. I know what money's available.
Right. And
just absolute peace.
And the great thing about that is what you learned there. You mentioned that like you had failed at it before, but you keep coming back to it. Well, why do you keep coming back and trying again? Because it's better than the alternative.
Right. Which
it's
is
better
not
than
knowing
having no balance.
Right.
And I would attempt to argue that for any area of your life. Attempting to have some kind of balance in your life is better than having no balance.
Right.
I mean, look at your physical health. Like attempting to work on your physical health and exercise or eat healthy is better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, well, I suppose. You could make that argument.
What do you mean you suppose? I mean, if you're not going to attempt to work on your physical health at all, eventually your physical health is going to degenerate.
Well,
I mean, you can make the same case that even if you work on it, it's going to degenerate.
right.
But it will degenerate less quickly than it would.
Well, I think a large part of why people put so much focus is just the world we live in. So many people have desk jobs, and junk food is so highly available. I think, like, maybe necessarily, people don't work. Plenty of people do. So I'm not saying that people don't work. There are plenty of people that work for a living, but a lot of more people don't have to work, actually work. Talk about putting attention on your physical health, as long as you I don't know. I'm not one for running or sweating.
Fair enough, but that doesn't mean it's not important.
You think it's important?
I do think it's important.
What do you think is the consequence for not, pushing yourself to exercise?
Well, I would say that depends on the other factors that go into your physical health.
Like your diet?
Like, exactly, your diet.
What if you have, like, a reasonable diet and you work and you're not, like, completely lazy?
You work
physically.
Okay, so you do a lot of manual labor then.
Mm-hmm. But you're not stressing your body out too much. You just, you're not like a couch potato. Do you think it's really important to actually, like, make time to go to the gym? Do you think it's going to hurt you if you don't?
Not necessarily, but that's because you haven't incorporated it into another area of your life.
Okay.
I mean, if you had no physical activity whatsoever, like you work
at a desk.
Or you're on an assembly line and you're not moving at all. And then you come home and you're not focusing on your physical health at all. Or you can say that you're not paying attention to your diet at all.
Well, what if your diet just consists of good stuff and that's not by a focus, of you just like good food. You just eat good foods. You just don't eat junk food. It's not like you're being super intentional. You just no, I'm not going to eat hamburgers every single night, I'll eat like broccoli and stuff because this is the stuff I want to eat. Do you really have to put focus into being healthy physically?
I guess in that situation you wouldn't have to.
I don't
know.
I just feel like
still an
popular. I feel like because physical health is so easy to point to and it shows through so highly in appearances, I feel like it's overemphasized. If I'm honest with you, I feel like, and I'm not saying it's unimportant, eating hamburgers and, gaining too much weight that you could avoid and just having high cholesterol and all that because you just live a horrible, unhealthy life is bad. I feel like it's overemphasized nowadays, though, like going to the gym, being fit, especially I mean, I know we're not political,
I
especially like in people my age. It's like that's the end all be all of having life balance, and I think it's just overemphasized. Like I know plenty of people that
I I I can see where you're coming from with that argument, but I mean
not that
I try
being
to use
healthy
I try to
is
use the term exercise and not going to the gym. I mean,
Mhm.
going to the gym is a form of exercise, but there's many forms of exercise.
Yeah,
My point being that like if you're working a very labor intense job, physically labor intense job, then you have that exercise.
Right.
That may wear on you over the course of 40 years.
Especially if you're like a roofer or a framer or something like that.
Right. But still, you have that incorporated into your life.
Right.
So, yes, you could make the case that not everyone has to focus on their physical health as much as others.
Right.
But it is still something that everyone has to focus on.
You think so?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's real easy to fall off the horse on a diet.
Yes, it could be. Like, especially if you like eating junk food, I guess.
Right. Or if you like going out to eat, it's convenient. It's easy to go out to eat. And for the most part it tastes good.
Right. Oh yeah. Big thick pizza. Who doesn't love a big thick cheesy, like greasy giant slabs of sausage pizza, It's real easy. Yeah, I love pizza.
Yeah, and it might be okay to have that every now and again, but having such imbalance in your life that you're doing that every day or even multiple times a day, maybe even multiple times a week, like that's not healthy for you.
Yeah, I don't know.
It leads to other problems. It leads to heart trouble and risk of heart attack. It leads to, if you want to get, you can go into the biological aspects of it with how it affects your cardiovascular system. But
right.
My point being that like it increases your risk for illnesses and tragic things that you would rather not happen. It increases the risk of that happening.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's always overemphasized, and that is largely just my opinion. It's like, okay, you don't want to be unhealthy. You don't want to take a bunch of drugs and prescriptions that will wreck you. You don't want to eat junk food all the time. Sure, like being unhealthy is bad, but I feel like people maybe it's not wasting, spend too much of their time focusing on like your physical health. If you need it, yeah, I don't know. Like, I definitely agree. Like, eating healthy foods is good.
I agree with you that you can. There can be an imbalance the opposite way. Like, you can spend too much time working out, or you can spend too much time, or attempting to get exercise, especially if you have a very labor-intensive job.
Yeah, I guess, I'm also young, too.
Right, and there's a lot of...
So my health is like, like I pretty much do whatever I want with my body, and it doesn't really care. I keep just, push through it, that young and invincible thing. So maybe that goes into it. Maybe I'll turn like 50 and I'll be like, oh, I really get it now, Could be.
Yeah, I would say so. That would be one of my main points there, is that you may not be focusing on it so much now, but maybe if you did focus more on it now, the consequences for that would be less later. You would sacrifice. That's just a sacrifice. Like if you're going to sacrifice the time to balance your physical health now, then later it won't be such an issue, or as much of an issue.
Yeah. Yes, and I could definitely understand that, especially when you talk about stuff where like there's irreversible damage. There a lot of things studies show, like you hurt your back, you mess up your back, and that's probably going to stick with you for forever.
Right, especially if it's something that's very, very hard to reverse. Like,
right.
On an extreme level, like you're paralyzed. Like the odds are you're not you won't be able to come back from that, or at least make a full recovery.
Right, or like, you're a tradesperson, you're somebody who actually goes out and works, and you never wear
I don't like that term.
Tradesperson?
No, I don't like the term actually goes out and works.
Physical labor.
Well, I'm sorry, but it just implies that, like,
A desk job isn't real work. That's
Yes.
different work. When I say
it's meant, yes, it is. It's the difference between mentally intensive work.
you're right.
Physically intensive
That's not
work.
fair. That was not fair what I said. Okay, but still, you do, stuff that makes you sweat and exhausts your body.
Right. I get where you're coming from. I don't want it to come off the wrong way.
And you expose yourself like to chemicals, whether you're working on cars and you never wear gloves, or you're working with metal and you don't wear a respirator or paints, and you end up inhaling a bunch of, little pieces of metal
Or just
dust.
hazardous materials in general.
Yeah, and you don't take care of yourself and you get cancer or some sort of irreversible poisoning. Sure, like you don't want to do that,
Right, and especially if it's going to be your own fault. Like, if you had the access to a respirator and you chose not to wear a respirator, and because of that you
have lung
cancer or something like that, that could have been easily avoided.
Right.
So maybe take that in consideration. And that's something I didn't realize when I was younger. When I was younger, it was I did a lot of like metal working,
like grinding. If you're grinding, you need to wear a respirator. For people that don't know, you really should,
or
because
filing, stuff like that. Yeah, you should wear a respirator, and
'Cause
you
that's
should wear
something
safety glasses. That was something that I really didn't pay a lot of attention to. It was just like, oh, fire up the grinder and let's grind some metal down. But it was, I think it was. There was one time in particular that I remember. I got a metal shard stuck in my eye. It took me probably half an hour to get it out, and my eye took about 3 days to heal, and that was just miserable.
Right. I think most people who are going to be working with metal know, like, yeah, you should, even when they're doing it, like, I should be wearing safety glasses, but a lot of people don't think, like, wear a respirator. But I'll tell you what, that you're grinding on steel, and that dust gets everywhere, and you may not realize it, but you're inhaling it. I couldn't tell you how many times I've woken up the next day after spending a night grinding whatever, and I go to blow my nose, and there are just bits of metal shavings that just come out of my nose. It's horrible. That stuff will get in your lungs like so fast, and it probably doesn't come out. So yes, definitely you should wear a respirator to anyone ever, just so you know. That's a very good idea. Wear a respirator, especially if you're going to be grinding in a closed space for a long period of time. A little bit off topic, but that's important.
It is important, very important.
Yeah, so there are plenty of things we could have talked about, but I think overall we hit the areas where we should balance and kind of the things we should balance. We could have gone more into kind of strategies on how to balance, but a lot of that I think is opinion, and a lot of that I think is stuff you kind of have to learn for yourself. But I feel like
yes.
we got a pretty decent coverage, and we'll probably come back to this topic later. So
I would be happy to come back to this topic. There's, as you said, there's a lot more details we could get into on
specific strategies for
right
finding
implementation of finding balance in certain areas, and we could even go into different philosophical areas of it too. Talk about the ancient Asian sages, basically the Asian philosophers who developed things like the yin and yang symbol, and talk about balance in those areas too, or reference what Jordan Peterson talks about the balance between chaos and order. But I think we did a pretty good overview of balance in your life scenario.
Right, in an applicable way.
Right. So, yeah, if there's interest in it, I'd be happy to go in more detail about them or even explore other areas that balance is related to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well. I mean, there's a lot of different areas we talked about tonight, and kind of came to some conclusions about there being no set in stone formula for finding balance, but there are certain areas to tend to, those being balancing your time and then balancing the 5 other areas of your life, those being your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, social health, and spiritual health. And then talking about resources and money, and you had a lot of great things to say in that area. So yeah, I think that was a really good and helpful conversation. I learned quite a bit from you, and I learned a bit from my own thinking too.
Yep, I agree. I'm the same boat. Still don't know about that whole focusing on exercising thing. See, we'll leave it for later. Anyway, I had a great time. And I hope you all had a great time also. Thank you for listening to this episode of At the Root of Knowledge. Did we get something wrong? We're interested in hearing from you. This isn't just a one-sided conversation. We want to see what type of thoughts we stir up in the people out there. We're available now on YouTube, Spotify, and Podbeam. You can also follow us and look at our recent updates on Facebook and Instagram at the Root of Knowledge. Till next time, goodbye.